I would invite everyone to come in and find a seat where you're comfortable. We'd like to begin. That worked. So I would like to say welcome. Welcome to VTS. Welcome to A Taste of the Evening School. I'm Lisa Kimball. I'm the Associate Dean for Lifelong Learning here at VTS. And I'm welcoming those of us in this room and delighted that you're here. I'm also welcoming people online. We are live streaming and we are Facebook Living. So we hope and pray that people are in many parts of this country participating with us tonight. And it is delightful to have you here. For anyone who is with us online, you may not know that it is pouring rain in Virginia today. And of course, for any of us noticing the rain locally, we cannot but help think about the tragedy that is unfolding in Texas and Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast. And I think it is important for us here not to take for granted the freedom and the safety and the privilege that we have to gather. And to gather with abundance and plenty, to gather in the name of God, to gather to learn, to gather to meet one another. And I give thanks for that. And I'm grateful to you all for venturing out to share that with me. I also think we must be serious about expressing our deep gratitude for the generosity and the sacrifice that so many volunteers, so many rescue workers are giving and dedicating of themselves and of their time in those circumstances. I want to remember especially the people that are being heroic and the people who are forgotten, the people who are in the midst of the crisis and no one yet knows. And I want us to commit ourselves to provide support to these women, men, and children for the long haul. This is not a short event. This will be a very long period of recovery. And so I hope that most of you picked up, those of you here in the physical space, picked up one of these postcards as you came in. It is our gift to you as an invitation for your generosity. And if you will see on one side, there are 3 options there for you to make a donation, a cash donation, which is clearly what is needed right now. They are asking for cash that is useful for immediate emergency response. And we have 3 choices that might be helpful to you. One is the Episcopal Relief and Development Organization, which is an utterly responsible and reliable Episcopal foundation that has an incredible record of this kind of relief work. So their website is here for online giving, and it's a very user-friendly website. I've already used it. If you would like to immediately give a $10 donation through the American Red Cross using your mobile device, you can do that even as you speak through a text. That information is here. For those of you online, the text is you text Harvey to 90999. Harvey to 90999. And that will mobilize $10 directly to the Red Cross. And finally, if you would like to make a cash donation in cash or check, you can do that here tonight. There's a basket that will be by the door, and we will be sure all of those funds go directly to the emergency response, probably through our partner dioceses that are working so hard and so faithfully. So, with that in mind, I invite those of you with a card to turn it over, and you will see 2 prayers. And I would like us to pray together the second of those 2 prayers. It's also here on the screen for those of you online. Join me in the prayer for preparedness and response. Let us pray. O God, our times are in your hand. In the midst of uncertainty, lead us by your never-failing grace as we seek to be agents of healing and hope. Walk with us through dangerous times. Watch over us in danger, and give us a spirit of love and compassion for those who suffer and mourn. And finally, remind us that you have promised never to leave us, so that even in the valley of the shadow of death, your love may be felt. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you. Now we have a really wonderful moment here before we begin the evening's program. I am told, and I have seen, that Martha Jenkins is in the house. Come on down, Martha Jenkins. Martha completed her certificate in the evening school in the spring and was unable to join us for the certificate award ceremony. So Martha, you are here, and we are grateful and proud of your accomplishment. This is a series of courses that you can take, and you earn a certificate in the evening school. So I want to say congratulations. 5 long years she did it. So congratulations. Well done. That was fun. And now it is my great privilege to introduce tonight's speaker. The Reverend Nathan Walker is the executive director of the Religious Freedom Center of the Newseum Institute in DC. Nate describes himself as a religious liberty educator, specializing in issues of religion in public life, particularly as it relates to civil and human rights. He is the co-editor with Edwin J. Greenlee of the 2011 publication, Whose God Rules? Is the United States a Secular Nation or a Theolegal Democracy? And interestingly, the foreword in that book was by the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He's currently co-editing with Michael Wagoner the Oxford Handbook on Religion and American Education. And this time, the foreword is written by Martin E. Marty. In addition to his very demanding professional and public life, Nate prioritizes his own learning. He is currently an advanced doctoral candidate himself and will defend his dissertation in Law, Education, and Religion at Teachers College, Columbia University in the spring. And for all of us who are fully engaged in theological education and congregational leadership, you'll be interested to know that Nathan received his Master's of Divinity in Religion and Education from the Union Theological Seminary in New York, was ordained in 2007 by members of the Fourth Universalist Society in the city of New York and the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. For 15 years, Nathan served urban congregations in a variety of capacities in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, the last 7 until 2014 as the senior minister and executive director of the historic First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. Nathan and I share a conviction that the health of American democracy depends on religious literacy of our citizens. The VTS Evening School is committed to teaching the language and the practices of faith. And I thank you, Nate, for being with us tonight to inspire us toward fluency. The Reverend Nathan Walker.
You're so sweet. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. It's said that the greatest gift we can give one another is our very presence. And I am deeply honored to be in your presence. I'm grateful to you, Lisa. I'm very grateful to Anne for making all this possible and for all the colleagues that have brought this event together. We are in a midst of great change, of great uncertainty. There is a dialogue that I would like to have with the country, starting with us here, just at the edge of the nation's capital, where many of you I know have been involved in government positions. You and your families have served the government in different capacities, and you have served as civic leaders and religious leaders in various ways. And so with that, I want to say thank you for your engagement. Thank you for not shying away from controversy or ambiguity as it relates to issues of religion in public life. I think it is vital for us to keep this conversation alive, specifically about the constitutional guarantees for people of all religions and none. I work at the Newseum, and on the front of that building, as many of you know, is the 45 words of the First Amendment that make clear that there is a guarantee to freedom of religion, there's freedom of press, speech, the freedom to petition your government, to assemble. These are interlocking rights that are very much challenged in the political discourse that we're having today. And yet these rights are the things that are holding the discourse together. So we are in a very interesting time. At the museum, we welcome religious and civic leaders from around the country to train with us on how to become constitutional and human rights specialists about issues of religion and public life. So in this opening video, you're going to hear from the various students that have been attracted to our online programs, as well as the on-site educational activities. And then after this, we're going to explore some key questions for how the United States has become the first nation that I know of in human history to have a nation of religious minorities. And this occurred in 2012 when Protestants became a minority. So what does it mean to govern a nation of religious minorities? What kinds of opportunities and challenges does that leave us, the first generation, to have such a privilege and a burden? Here are some of the religious and civic leaders that we've been working with to explore some of those same questions.
My name is Omer bin Riaz.
Ebony Janice Moore.
Oliver Fennell.
John Thomas. Masoon Idris.
I'm originally from Pakistan,
California. Texas.
North Carolina.
Virginia. Massachusetts.
Full-time student.
Journalist. Banker.
A high school teacher.
Organic food developer.
I'm Jewish.
A Unitarian Universalist.
Baptist. A Sunni Muslim.
Interfaith.
Mormon.
Muslim.
Sikh. Multi-religious.
Educating people about religious freedom now is the most important thing that we have to do in our country today.
Religious freedom just means plainly the freedom and the ability to practice my religion or any religion without backlash.
One of the basic freedoms a human being should have.
Religious freedom is the reason why my family is alive and well and living in America.
There's a phrase I've heard, I really wish I could remember who said this, but it's not religious freedom at all unless it's religious freedom for all. And I think that's part of what just makes it so important.
In order to be a full citizen of the United States of America, a country that was frankly founded on religious freedom, we have to have a means of teaching and telling that story holistically and objectively and clearly. The Religious Freedom Center does that.
I dream of plural society that can have dialogue with each other and citizens being knowledgeable about other faiths besides their own. And I think the Religious Freedom Center is moving our society towards that.
Taking a course at Religious Freedom Center was one of my best academic decisions, but I realized that it is going to benefit me not just as a journalist, but as a human being as well.
The Religious Freedom Center is a safe space. I'm so impressed. When I first walked in the door, it's just a warm environment, and everybody is really nice. It's like everybody just one big happy family.
I think the Religious Freedom Center is training an army of leaders. It's really not about talking about things, it's about getting people acting on things.
It is not only about coming here to meet in person with fellow students and cohorts. It's about merging the experience with conferences that involves the public.
As a result of the violence and discrimination with religious minorities, there are millions of internally displaced people in Nigeria that need help. Many are without food or medicine. A famine is occurring. You never read about it almost, only in the New York Times.
Real world, in everyday life, Muslims don't speak for Muslims.
Stand up for the people you disagree with and come to the table and find ways to live together across your differences.
Discussion about how the United States has become a nation of religious minorities.
Having the opportunity to meet people of so many different and diverse backgrounds, whether that's religious, racial, economic, just geographic, being able to have everyone in one place and in the nation's capital has just been so invaluable.
You know, for so often I have been curious about the beliefs, but I never asked anyone.
It was really interesting to meet the people from different faiths. For the first time I talked to a Jew. I have never talked to a Jew.
This does not have to be a wedge issue. This does not have to be a partisan issue. This can be an issue that actually builds bridges between people of good faith, whether that faith is religiously grounded or not, to make a better civil society.
The Religious Freedom Center. I think it has the potential to be, and is in my mind, the nerve center for religious freedom in our country.
In many ways, we all have a lot in common. We're lifelong learners, eternally curious, trying to work out some of the big questions about our body politic, but also about our identities. And I think a lot of what that we're seeing in the conflicts around religion and public life have to do with a clash of identities. And so I'd like us to explore some key ideas together. First is, how do we know that the nation is a nation of religious minorities? And two, what can we do about it? And why us? Why now? So the first way that we know that the United States is a nation of religious minorities is that we know something about the true nature of religions. They divide. There are over 4,200 different types of Christianities. 4,200 type of Christianities. Imagine if we spoke about Islam with the same type of complexity, about the many different Islams in the world. Could it be that we might accurately portray the true nature of religions, which is that they're local? What one group does in one community may be a little bit different than what another does. So a negative way could be saying dividing. Another way is you're helping people matter. You're helping democratize religion, give people a say in their faith community, in their faith development, having a say in what they're investing in as institutions and institutional building. The reason why there are 4,200 Christianities is often are disputes over theological things or land or around charismatic leaders, sort of changes and shifts. And out of that, there has been great bloodshed. And yet, also out of that, there have been people who've been able to organize locally and make sense of their lives and be cared for by their community from womb to tomb. Another way that we know that we are in a nation of religious minorities is we're seeing people disaffiliate from traditional forms of religiosity, like membership in a congregation. Then number one reason why people are disaffiliating is because of politics. The politicalization of questions of women, environment, gays, science, choose your topic. It has led people to be splintered in worship. So when they come to mourn, when they come to reflect upon the nature of life and their relationship with all that is holy, they find themselves organizing in political systems which can often cause harm to the body. And so, what are people doing instead? They're disaffiliating and finding other ways to express themselves. We're seeing a decrease in traditional forms of religiosity like worship attendance and rites of passage, like a traditional church wedding versus the wedding in the garden or in the park or in the home. Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. We're also seeing that there is a decrease in the strength of people's religious identity. So in polling Catholics, for instance, in the United States, 27% of US Catholics now claim a strong religious identity. Many of them have a decrease in their strength in their identity claim because of politics. My grandmother was raised Catholic and raised her kids Catholic, but when she told the priest that her husband was beating her and her children and was an alcoholic and that she was going to divorce him, the priest at the time said, if you do so, then you'll be excommunicated. And so she divorced her husband and the church, right? It can be trauma that sometimes splinters people off. And that's a very particular one. Of course, the pedophilia scandals and others could be other reasons why people will disaffiliate. But why do people claim a religious identity is a key part of the question of religious identity, with religious literacy, which we'll get to in a moment. We're also seeing that there are 5 million fewer mainline Protestant adults in just the last 7 years alone. So these kinds of shifts are dramatic. Other kinds of shifts that we're seeing have to do in not necessarily belief in God, that has been a constant, but actually a certainty of belief in God. There's more of the spiritual practice of doubt that, like Mother Teresa talked about, that you're experiencing in the midst of these transitions in people's lives. You're also seeing a change in theological views. If you take a look at the American Grace study, you'll see that anywhere from 83 to 89% of Christians believe a person of another religion or faith can go to heaven. So there's a kind of universal, this is the tradition in which I was ordained, of the belief that God is too good to damn. You're born of love, you return to love, and therefore my neighbor, who may not be of my own faith, will still be together in heaven. This belief is radically different than what many traditional creeds articulate in many different traditions. And this caused some kind of controversy in a Lutheran church, in the Missouri Synod in particular, where Putnam and Campbell, who did the American Grace study, interviewed members of the congregation and said to the Lutheran pastors, look, you have an overwhelming majority of members of your congregation who believe people of different faiths can go to heaven. And for some of the pastors, it was a crisis of faith. They felt that they had failed in their ministries and in their work, and they felt like they had failed the church and their congregants. Because salvation was so critical. It's a motivating factor for missionizing and so on, they articulated. So what happens when the leaders and the institutional statements of faith might have different expressions of theology than the people within that faith? So the point I'm trying to make is that there's religious diversity even within communities, often on very important matters. You're also seeing some pretty big changes in behavior. Take, for instance, just white heterosexual Christians in the United States. I'm not talking about gay marriage here. I'm talking white heterosexual Christians and trends in marriage. From 1974 until 2016, there's been a dramatic decrease in the number of white Christians who are married, from 62% to 28%. I think this may explain why there has been a lot of anxiety about the question of marriage, but we know why people are not marrying. Often it's because of student debt and delaying home ownership and couples finding careers in multiple locations, a delaying of child rearing, and so on. These are cultural norms that may explain some of these patterns. And so this might help explain how the behavior of religiosity is shifting, as well as attitudinal shifts on some of the major moral questions, such as the legitimacy of same-sex marriage. Just from 2006 to 2016, in that 10-year period, you saw a flip in the polls from multiple studies. And now you're seeing that almost all Christian groups are now accepting of homosexuality. This is a fundamental shift in the nature of Christianities in the United States. And the fact that these trends are happening across the board, across traditions, is absolutely fascinating. It's not only here, it's happening around the world. As a result of these changes, you're seeing dramatic shifts in the religious identities across generations. So in this survey by the Public Religion Research Institute, you'll see that the bar on your left has a large green bar, and that shows the large number of unaffiliated. And so you're seeing in the 18 to 26-year-old age bracket, you're seeing a large unaffiliated. This was true for even the baby boomers, right? But what we're seeing is that those trends to become more religious as you get older with child rearing and so on are not actually occurring. And so the question is why? One of the main reasons is that parents aren't raising their kids religious. They're not building a habit, and therefore it creates a non-affiliate kind of norm. Whereas others were raised religious, still identify as religious, but may not be as religious, and may not attend services as much. So these are some of the changes. So what happens when you have a very different demographic with young people than you do with the elders of the society? Could it be that there is a lack of language from which to dialogue? And could it be that a lot of the social conflicts that are leading people to move away from religiosity are also charged at the dinner table when you have the cross-generational conversations? So I think these are some of the patterns that might show that with the generational gaps and so on, that we know that we're definitely a changing nation. there's some structural elements to this as well, and it has to do with the legalization and the legal construction of race in the United States. From 1791 until 1965, there was one constant in the requirement to become a citizen. You had to be white. Of course, after the Civil War, those who were once held in servitude were granted citizenship through this constitutional change, through the Reconstruction period. So you did see in the citizenship stats that change in diversity. But what happens when you legally construct a nation for whoever can enter it from the time the Bill of Rights was written and ratified, 1791, through Kennedy's administration, if you were white, then you were eligible to become a citizen. There were two Supreme Court cases that upheld these rulings. The first was with a Japanese immigrant, Takawa Ozawa, and he was denied citizenship because he did not meet the legal definition of white. And this definition was one in which was created and interpreted by the court. A few years later, Bhagat Singh Thind, he came before the Supreme Court and said, I served this country in the military in World War II. I have given my life in service. I have dedicated myself. I am of Indian descent. I am from the Sikh tradition, but I am American. And if you want to question the scientific nature of my race, look at my biological heritage. I am from the Caucasus, he said, of India, where the term Caucasian came from. So I can imagine him saying, I'm more white than even you, judges. It was not persuasive, and he was denied citizenship. His son sent me this picture of him, which I have on my desk, as a reminder that the legal construction of race created a system in which people from many different lands who did not meet that definition were denied access. After Kennedy, that changed the nature of our religious landscape. There are 7 times more Muslims, 10 times more Buddhists, 9 times more Hindus, 220 times more Sikhs than there were in 1970. Still, Muslims make up 1% of the US population. But 9 out of 10 reports about Islam are about violence. So what happens when you have a long-standing legal construct on race? You begin to create a quota system that changes the racial ethnic demographics of the country, which influences the increased religious diversity of the nation over several generations. Could it be that all these different trends could be factors for why Protestants became a religious minority in 2012 for the first time in US history? These trends are not isolated. We're seeing these trends around the world where we've moved from a kind of religions of race, from religions of nation states, from religions of regions, to religions of individuals. White converts to Islam, to Sikhism. You see a large increase of number of people of color who are joining traditions that weren't traditionally structured as white. So why is that? So what you're seeing globally around the world is a net change where there's a dramatic projection of a rise of the unaffiliated and a decrease in Christians, with a slight rise in those who identify as Buddhists. But a lot of these changes that we're seeing around the world are still projections. Recent projections suggest that these might be too dramatic, that they could be waning, those who are unaffiliated. But you don't have to look at all of these stats to know that we are a nation of religious minorities. All you have to do is go to work, go to school, look at your neighborhood. There is a lot of opportunity to have encounter. And yet in close circles, friendships, people still are in this tribal pattern of having friendships by racial affiliation. And so these patterns create minimal opportunities to have an encounter of others unless you really get out of your comfort zone and engage in the world. So it's in this context at the Religious Freedom Center, we're experimenting with creating that encounter. As you saw from the people, there in our cohort that just are starting next week, there are 29 different religious identities represented and 11 nationalities, and they're from 29 different states. And what we're trying to do is create a social experiment through education to create that encounter that might possibly result in some kind of opening, ultimately leading us to say, what can we actually do in this highly polarized time in a nation of religious minorities? Well, the first thing we can do is we can reflect upon the true nature of our body politic, and that is grief. All these protests, all of these acts of rage, of anger, of tweeting, it is a kind of lament. We are a nation grieving. The reason why Make America Great Again was so powerful, it captured the lament of people who felt left behind by all these changes. And then at the same time, with the women's marches and so on, you see public acts of lament. We're a nation grieving. Said another way, we are a nation who are constantly pushing us out of circles of marginality and mattering. In one place, I feel like I matter. In another, I feel marginal. It's often our religious communities that can serve as a home base for us to help us feel like we matter. But the changing nature of religion has been so dynamic that has often been uncertain for people who've been pushed out of those communities, especially when it comes to these political issues. And so, what can we do as citizens, as civic leaders, as religious leaders in this context? We can listen to where people feel marginal and remind them that they matter. We're not talking about First Amendment law here. We're talking about being human beings. We're talking about creating a kind of moral empathy for one another. This starts with civil dialogue. It is lost right now. Right now, it is all about who can have a win over demeaning somebody, rather than taking the time to make meaning. There's a difference between demeaning, tearing down, and making meaning with another. That is the exercise of civil dialogue. What does it mean to be religiously literate about all of these changing demographics? What does it mean to recognize that there are legal protections that guarantee freedom of religion or belief for people of all religions and none? What does that mean in this changing dynamic? At the Religious Freedom Center, we have a theory of change. We believe that if we engage in civil dialogue with one another, and I'll explain what that actually means, where we really listen to understand one another. And we actually promote religious literacy as a civic competency to prepare the next generation to be able to be knowledgeable about different religions. Not to have them change their own religious identity or disaffiliate or affiliate, but to know their neighbor. To be knowledgeable so that they can de-stereotype one another. And if we can promote legal literacy as a competency, and we recognize that there are the three rights of liberty, everybody has rights, everybody has the responsibility to protect those rights of others, and to do so in a respectful way, we might create a culture of mutual understanding where that civil dialogue is more enjoyable than ever. And then the circle continues. So what is dialogue? It's an encounter with difference. It's a process of seeking understanding. It doesn't mean debate. It doesn't mean mediation or conflict resolution. Just to listen to understand. Imagine if that was our primary goal. Understanding need not imply agreement. What if, through this work, we were to recognize that dialogue, that pluralism that we're experiencing, was a kind of energetic engagement with difference, like Diana Eck talks about? That it's a type of active seeking of understanding of that difference. This is not about relativism. It's about a encounter of commitments. You don't have to leave yourself at the schoolhouse gate. You don't have to leave your identity when you go to work or when you go to the polls. You can be authentic wherever you go. And therefore, if everybody is given that opportunity, then that dialogue is based on an opportunity to grow and learn, to take and give criticism, and to develop. But that is all based on the premise, on questions of religion in public life, to understand the true nature of religion. And that is one, as Diane Moore says, religions are internally diverse, like we talked about earlier. They're dynamic. They change over time. They're not static. They're living traditions. And three, they're embedded in all aspects of culture. They can't just be separated out. And so in this way, my colleague Ben Marcus talks about three ways people create religious identities. One is through expressions of belief. Other through acts of belonging. And others are through key acts of behavior. So take, for instance, if I have a belief statement and I say this, therefore I identify with this tradition, then I make an identity claim. But for some people, belief may not be the primary entry point into their religious identity formation. Jews after the Holocaust, by striking numbers, had a decrease in certainty of God because they felt like they were left at the hands of the Nazis. And so their faith waned. So they built their identity, even like they did in many generations before, based on acts of belonging, by key acts of behavior, ritual from womb to tomb, caring for people, so that you get people today to say, yes, I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious. What does that mean? And so these are the types of complex ways people form their identities. This is what it means to be religiously literate, to recognize all these different patterns from the psychological to the anthropological. And all of this is made possible by a constitution in which there are two principles: free exercise of religion and no establishment. These are two principles for one right that we call religious freedom. And that this is inherently tied to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that everybody has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. That right includes the freedom to change his or her religion or belief. Freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. This language was born out of the Holocaust, where a religious minority was singled out for extermination. This type of wisdom came from conflict. It came from controversy. It came from all of these contradictions in our commitments. I believe controversies that we're experiencing today will come great wisdom and a renewed commitment to rights for people of all religions and none, and it will manifest in many different ways. Freedom of religion for some, freedom for religion for others, freedom from religion in certain cases, and freedom within religions. These four frames are the patterns which we're seeing all around the world take place in constitutional and in policy decisions. And so, this is what it means to be legally literate about these protections, where everyone has rights, everyone has the responsibility to protect those rights and do so in a respectful way. And so in closing, how I make meaning of all of these complexities is from a pastoral one. In serving congregations for those years and now doing religious liberty education, I have come, and I'm speaking for myself, not as the museum, but as somebody who deeply cares about the spiritual practice of the moral imagination. In cultivating empathy, I explore these encounters where in my church in Philly, we had a punk band that played a concert. It was about to play a concert in a basement because we were that funky urban church where the punk bands loved to play. And it was apparently going to attract skinheads. Everyone around me advised, shut it down. Shut it down. Don't let them speak. Cancel the show. Get this, do not engage. But I had this impulse to practice the spiritual discipline of the moral imagination. And I can't believe it, but I invited the skinheads. We met in the ministerial suite, and we had a long, gritty conversation about all these different issues and the changes of the country and what does white supremacy mean and what is the difference between white pride and white power. And then him opening up the computer and looking at the different threads for these intranets of white supremacy that he was talking about. And it was my own white privilege that gave me access to have a conversation because I can count to 5. A 1 who is ideologically over here can never talk to a 5. But a 1 who might have some kind of identity similarity to someone who is a 3 or to maybe have that conversation. I would never have a colleague who's a person of color go into that mediation, but somehow that skinhead allowed me as a white male to have that. And I said, but you realize my partner is Indian and has a green card and just became a citizen. You know I'm gay and I'm in an interracial relationship. Why are you talking to me? Why are you coming to my church? And we have those engaged conversations. And trust me, listening was not about agreement. right? It was about seeking some kind of understanding. And that's what I'm seeing play out right now in the body politic, is that there's an unwillingness to have the most difficult of conversations, because just the topic itself should be off the agenda. So how I understand all of this is that we have a collective charge to ask ourselves, why us and why now? And I understand that to mean that we have to move beyond the inferiority and the superiority complexes that plague our political system right now. Those of us who have been marginalized by these various things, we matter. We need to have the self-worth to show up, to engage. For those of us who have been ingrained in systems of, take for instance, white supremacy, we need to dethrone ourselves from the center of this country. We have to do the internal work to recognize that we are part of these patterns of privilege. And then in doing that work, we might collectively move those who have been marginalized into systems of mattering. And I think with that, we're going to be able to do something that no other nation has ever had the burden or the privilege to do. And that is to promote diversity over uniformity. And that is to seek mutual understanding and move us beyond the zero-sum game where one person's win is another person's loss. We have to move beyond that dualism. And a lot of the dualism we're seeing on religious liberty issues has to do with this idea that liberty is a sword. What true liberty, as we know from all these vignettes in history, from our family lives, is that true liberty is a shield to protect the most vulnerable. And so I hope all of us in our own special ways can be shields for those with whom we are different. And that collectively we can truly govern the first nation of religious minorities. Thank you so much for your attentiveness.
Thank you, Nate. We have sort of 10 minutes or so for some really honest questions with Nate and with each other. You brought, I think, a lot of content to the fore that many of us are aware of, but you put it in a context of urgency and of, I would say, moral obligation to come from our places of deep conviction to a place of acting in faith as people who have deep respect and regard for people of different faith. So what we'd love to do is to take some questions, and if there are multiple questions, we'll write them up on the board and let Nate kind of work through them. But if it's one at a time, we'll do it that way. We'd love to have comments, questions, and critiques. We're open to all of it. Rick.
Richard Jones. I'm not sure that I prize diversity over uniformity. If uniformity could mean all races and nations gathered together around the throne of God, each offering its distinctive praise to the one God. If God is one, fragmentation doesn't sound like a reflection. But I want to ask one historical question. I wonder if there's anyone in the room who was party to something that went on here on this hill 25 years ago or longer. It's my understanding the rector of Manuel on the Hill undertook to make the acquaintance of people who loved their rifles above all. And he went to try to understand by going to meetings of NRA members who were against all forms of gun control, to try to understand what was in their minds best of my knowledge, he understood them that they needed this protection in their own minds. I don't know that they ever understood what motivated him. I wonder if there's anybody present who remembers that effort at doing something like what you did in the minister's suite with the skinheads.
Thank you. We can take some others and
Other questions, and we'll sort of circle back.
Well, this is sort of more of a comment. When I was at VTS, we were studying Bowen theory, and it's about how you can be clearly who you are and stay connected to the other, someone who's different. And one thing I love about the church I go to is that we do ESOL, and we have a lot of Syrian refugees who come and learn English. And so we also have, for our people, the opportunity to go to an Alpha course. Do you all know what that is? It came out of England, and it's how people hear about Christianity. And we actually needed some folks to make lunch for us. So because we were so kind and the Syrians felt so loved there, they volunteered and they came and they made lunch and they did the Alpha course, except for the second week of that Jesus died. They didn't come to that because if you're a Muslim, Jesus didn't die. He went into heaven, you know. So then they came back the next week. But the whole point is that, you know, we welcome everybody and we love everybody. And God doesn't just say, "Oh, we only love people like us." So it's a great church to be in.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks for your talk. Actually, the previous two questions have just sparked a question from me, which is that I'm interested in what you think about, or what your answer is to the fact that a lot of these religious minorities, these religions, have a strong missional, evangelistic aspect to their character. And in building a country of religious minorities where encounter and dialogue is fostered, how do we also respect that missional element in some of these faiths, not all of them?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mike Kalnick. About 2 years ago, my wife and I went to Jerusalem and made a pilgrimage to the old city. I think of the entire world, no place cries out for peace more than Jerusalem does. And it's headed up by two people, both with rightist political bases, and they both stir up the pot of hate and discord, and because that satisfies their base. And it does nothing but cause problems. It's so sad. It truly is.
One more.
Thank you. I'm Stephen Spivak, 32 years, University of Maryland. My wife and I attend First Christian Church nearby on King Street. And by the way, I am Jewish and religious. The question, the trends that you're showing from my limited background, I'm an engineer, not in theology, is the trends are even further developed in Western Europe than they are here. So are our trends continuing along, if you will, a decline that clearly needs to be reversed or reinvigorated? And is Europe further along in that decline, or are the generous things and the intellect that you and your colleagues are bringing also happening in Western Europe in a way that might reverse, I think, even their more serious non-attendance in religions?
Yeah. So there's a lot of beautiful, yes, I'm sorry.
same time that the West seems to be, at the same time the West seems to be splintering, the rest of the world seems to be headed towards a fundamentalism kind of like activity. And, you know, these two counter forces are like olive oil and water. And we're starting to see incredible strife and conflict between the two facing, even in this country itself. I mean, one of the things, I never was afraid of anybody of any religion, but here lately, the rise of fundamentalism, I think our religious freedom and the Constitution of the United States, it could be in a threat. I think we're not too far away from having a constitutional convention that might do away with the Bill of Rights.
Wow, can I just hang out with you all the time? This is really important thoughts and questions. I know other of you have many of your own. I want to start with a story and kind of weave in a few themes. It's I'm really moved by your faith. I think the body of Christ, the envelopment of God, to have a theological basis for society is such a beautiful vision that's been carried out by many. But we also know that in certain countries where that's enshrined in law, it can create theological tests for office and citizenship. And I know that's not what you're recommending. But it reminded me of what happened in Pennsylvania in 2010 when there were several of us who helped with an amicus brief before a court that overturned the blasphemy laws in Pennsylvania. Did you know that we even had a blasphemy law? Well, what it was is there was a man who named his company I Choose Hell Productions. And the state said, we cannot give you that license because you're blasphemy against God. And this law is standing, and therefore, no, you can't have this company name. So he took it to court, and the judge asked him, why did you choose this name? And he said, well, I've been suicidal, and I think life is hell. And I choose hell. And I want to tell films about why people choose life and what they do. And he engaged in this whole thing. And this was the context in which we got to share stories of how universalists were not seen as theists at one point in Pennsylvania's history and were denied access to sit on juries and so on. And we got to tell those stories, which led to the overturning of Pennsylvania's blasphemy law in 2010. But the real problem of this pattern around the world is that people are being killed for expressing disbelief. And I think the real goal is for theists to fight for the right of conscience for everybody. And you're seeing some really interesting patterns for evangelicals around the world who are advocating for the rights of atheists. They've been so effective in U.S. Congress that they actually they effectively lobbied for a passage for protection of atheists in the International Religious Freedom Protection Act that Congress passed in December. And the reason is because they came out with a series of statements, and we've hosted them at the museum to talk about this. Like, why, as a missionary, as evangelical, fundamentalist Christian, would you advocate for someone's right to express no faith? And they said, well, if they were to disavow Allah in one context or the Orthodox Russian Church in another, maybe they would be open to hearing us. And so it became this really interesting shift where the right to proselytize and the right to change one's religion was all kind of connected. And at the same time, you're seeing all of these secularist atheist groups defending the rights of Christian minorities in Iraq and Syria who are going through a genocide. It is one of the most horrific humanitarian crises today. So it's all about defending the rights of people other than yourselves. And that's the goal of self-differentiation. That's the goal of creating those relationships where you can do service projects together and be changed one in one another. And that's what we can move beyond what you were talking about in Jerusalem, where we create narratives where we're the heroes of our own story. And if we challenge those narratives and we see the humanity in the other, then that's the work of peace. It is a great gift to be in your presence. I wish you continued health and happiness and prosperity, and I look forward to welcoming you to the Religious Freedom Center at the museum. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Nathan for challenging us and provoking us and compelling us, I hope, to think more deeply about what we believe and why it matters in our own identity construction, but also in our civic engagement. Couple of sort of public service announcements. We have a lot of extra food. We would love for you to take some home and share it with anyone or eat it yourself. So please don't be shy about that. Please take it with you because we will not be able to dispose of it responsibly otherwise. I want to thank Ann Carolee, who is in the back there in a green sweater. This would not have happened if it were not for Ann. Many of you know her personally, but she is the Associate Director of our Lifetime Theological Education Office, which means she runs the evening school, basically. And so thanks to Ann, she had this vision a few years ago to have a taste of the evening school, a teaser, as it were. And this teaser is provocative, we hope, but it also, we hope, will invite you to take seriously one of the courses that we're offering this fall. So if you haven't already settled on one or two, I heard about a couple of people taking two. Nobody will criticize you for that. The brochure we gave you, I believe, describes the courses. More information online. Lots of us here tonight can answer questions. If you are teaching this fall, would you stand up? Riley, is he still here? Oh, Riley just left. Okay, so Trin and Tricia are teaching a course on the theology of Rowan Williams. Riley Temple was here all evening. He folded brochures with us. And he is also, I get his title wrong every time I try to do this. His course is called Theology and the Modern Dramatists. And there are modern dramatists. So take a brochure, read up on these. There are several other courses. We are delighted to have had you here tonight. This would not have happened if you hadn't been here. And those of you online, we hope you enjoyed it. And we are grateful to you, too, for participating in this conversation. So, Nathan, thank you so much. We will see you at the museum. Blessings all.